Today's video is brought to you by Sheath Underwear, which is giving your balls the modern comfort that they deserve. Look, gentlemen, how many times you've been out on the town and things are just not going well, you know? Down below, it's too hot, skin is sticking to skin, maybe there's too much sweat, and people are looking at you while you're readjusting your pants. And you know what's not a good way to make new friends? Constantly sticking your hands down your trousers to readjust yourself, I promise you. You're not as stealthy as you think you are. Fortunately, there is Sheath Underwear, which is built specifically with you in mind. It's got these individual compartments in here to keep everything comfortable and separate. There's a little pouch for your Joey, another pouch for, the other parts of the male anatomy. Trust me, modern underwear that's ergonomically designed for the shape of your body is something you just have to try. There's less chafing, there's less sticking, there's less smelling. Look, summer's coming up. Everyone gets sweaty. It's okay. Sheath will help you out. So if you're still buying your underwear from the same brand that makes your socks, your undershirts, and your sister's bra, maybe it's time to give something a little more personalized a try. Right now, you guys can get 20% off Sheath Underwear by just clicking the link below and using the code BRAINFOOD at checkout. Alternatively, you can just go to sheathunderwear.com/brainfood. It's the same deal. 20% off. Do that, and your dry, comfortable balls will thank you endlessly. Again, sheathunderwear.com/brainfood. Or just click the link below and use code BRAINFOOD for 20% off. And now today's video. Ranked 66th on the Fortune 500, the Walt Disney Company is among the largest corporations in the United States and the second largest entertainment company in the world. Valued at over $148 billion, the company owns 5 of the 10 most valuable media franchises, including Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, operates 14 theme parks and resorts around the world, and owns more than 140 square kilometers of real estate, nearly 3 times the area of Manhattan. Given its sheer size and wealth, Disney has unsurprisingly exerted outsized influence in a wide variety of fields, from entertainment and transportation technology to city planning, copyright law, and politics. Yet, despite building its empire around wholesome, family-friendly entertainment, during the Second World War, the House of Mouse threw itself fully behind the war effort, producing a variety of propaganda and training films for the US government. Less well remembered, however, is Disney's unwitting contribution to the field of military technology, as one of its wartime films directly inspired a deadly weapon of war. This is the surprising story of the Disney bomb. During the Second World War, no nation poured more cubic meters of reinforced concrete than the Third Reich. The Nazi obsession with monumental fortifications extended from the bunkers of the Atlantic Wall stretching from Norway to Spain, to the massive U-boat pens at Lorient and La Rochelle, to the flak towers defending the skies over Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna. Symbols of brutality as much as strength, many of these structures were constructed by the some 1.4 million forced laborers of the Nazi Party's infamous organization TOT. In August 1943, Allied reconnaissance aircraft began spotting a number of strange new constructions across occupied France, the purpose of which were at first a mystery. These structures fell into 3 basic types. The first was a low bunker, from which projected a long, shallow ramp supported on concrete pillars. 4 of these installations were being built by the Germans at Siracourt, Devre, Tamerville, and Couville. The second type was a giant concrete dome, 71 meters in diameter, being built into the side of a disused chalk quarry at Vincennes. A similar rectangular bunker was also under construction nearby at Epauleck. The third and final installation was a complex of deep underground tunnels and angled shafts being built at Mimoyer in the Pas-de-Calais, the closest point in France to the United Kingdom. These strange installations, as the Allies would soon learn, were the launch sites for a new generation of high-tech weapon systems, which the Germans called Vergeltungswaffe, or vengeance weapons. The ram sites were built to launch the Fieseler Fi-103, better known as the V1 or the Buzz Bomb, an early cruise missile powered by a crude pulse jet engine. The bunker was used to store and disassemble the missiles, while the ramp contained a steam-powered catapult used to accelerate the weapons towards their targets, in this case the Greater London area. Once launched, the V1 would cruise across the English Channel at an altitude of 1,000 meters until a wind-driven propeller in its nose reached a certain number of revolutions. The missile's elevators would then spring downward, sending the weapon and its 1-ton explosive warhead diving towards the ground. The giant dome at Vincennes was designed to launch the more sophisticated V2, the world's first operational ballistic missile. The V2 was fueled by ethanol and liquid oxygen, the latter of which boiled off and had to be continuously manufactured. The Vincennes bunker thus incorporated a liquid oxygen plant and an underground workshop where missiles could be prepared and fueled before being transported via narrow-gauge railway to open-air pads for launch. In this manner, dozens of missiles could be launched against London every day. Unlike the V1, whose distinctive high-pitched buzzing sound could be heard for miles around and which could be shot down by anti-aircraft guns or sufficiently powerful fighter aircraft, the V-2 gave no such warning of its approach and was essentially unstoppable, descending on its target from the edge of space at twice the speed of sound. While impressive on paper, the Vesernes bunker was met with skepticism by many German army officers who saw fixed sites, however well fortified, as inherently vulnerable to attack. These officers preferred mobile rocket batteries, which could fuel and launch a V-2 within hours before moving on to a new site, making them extremely difficult for marauding Allied aircraft to track down and destroy. However, all these critics were overruled by Adolf Hitler, who was obsessed with grandiose military constructions. Finally, the underground fortress at Mimiek was built to house the V-3 cannon, a high-velocity gun that used multiple staggered propellant chambers to accelerate a special fin-stabilized shell fast enough to hit London from the coast of France. With a total of 25 gun barrels capable of firing 10 shots a minute, the battery, as designed, would have been able to bombard its target with up to 600 shells every hour. Taken together, the Atlantic Wall, U-boat pens, and fortified V-weapon sites presented a formidable obstacle to the Allied war effort, being all but impervious to regular high-explosive bombs. Furthermore, many strategic targets, such as railway tunnels and viaducts, have proven too small to effectively attack via conventional means. As plans for the invasion of Europe picked up steam, the search began for new kinds of weapons with which to take out these specialized targets. The solution came courtesy of legendary English engineer Barnes Wallis, who had famously designed the bouncing bombs used in Operation Chastis, the famous dam busters raid of May 16, 1943, against the 3 hydroelectric dams in the German Ruhr Valley. To solve the problem of attacking targets, Wallis designed a truly massive bomb that he called Tallboy. 21 meters long and weighing 5.5 tons, the Tallboy was so huge only one aircraft could carry it, the Avro Lancaster heavy bomber, and then only if 2 gun turrets and other components were removed to save weight. When dropped from an altitude of 6,500 meters, the streamlined Tallboy accelerated to a velocity of 750 kilometers per hour, nearly the speed of sound, before impacting the ground. This, along with the bomb's thick, hardened steel casing, allowed it to penetrate up to 5 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating, making it more than a match for even the strongest German bunker. More ingenious still, the Tallboy was designed to be effective even if it missed its intended target. If dropped next to a bunker or railway viaduct, for example, the bomb would penetrate deep into the earth and create a large underground blast cavern or camouflage. The resulting shockwave or earthquake effect would shake and undermine the entire structure, often resulting in greater damage than a direct hit. In July 1943, Wallis designed an even larger earthquake bomb called the Grand Slam, which was a full 2 meters longer and twice as heavy as the Tallboy, with an even thicker casing and greater penetration ability. Like the Tallboy, the Grand Slam was filled by hand-filling the casing with molten Torpex explosive, which could take up to a month to cool and solidify. Due to the expensive hand-built nature of the bombs, in an emergency, crews were instructed to attempt a landing with the bomb still aboard, rather than jettisoning it into the sea. The first earthquake bomb attack was carried out on June 8, 1944, against the Semur rail tunnel in France. 19 Royal Air Force Lancasters dropped Tallboys on the target, one of which penetrated the tunnel and detonated inside, knocking it out of action for the rest of the war. As part of Operation Crossbow, the overall Allied campaign against the German V-weapons, on June 19th, 24th and 25th, RAF Lancasters flew Tallboy raids against the V1 and V2 bunkers at Wotten, Vesernes, and Syracuse. The Syracuse bunker received 3 direct hits, while the Wotten and Vesernes bunkers were completely undermined by near misses. These and other crossbow raids ultimately led to the abandonment of fixed V-weapon sites, with all further V1s and V2s being launched from mobile installations. Later, in 1944, Tallboy sorties were carried out against the German battleship Tirpitz in its anchorage at Tromsøfjord in Norway, where it had already survived multiple attacks by conventional bombers and midget submarines. And for more on this, please do check out our previous video, A Worthy Opponent, The Glorious Death of Hampton Great. During the last of these attacks, Operation Catechism, on November 12th, 3 Tallboys penetrated the Tirpitz's deck and into its ammunition magazine, setting off a massive explosion that completely obliterated and capsized the ship. Operations using the larger Grand Slam began in the spring of 1944 with notable success, including the destruction of the Bielefeld Viaduct on March 14th and the Arbigen Bridge on March 21st, and a March 27th raid on the Valentine submarine pens in Bremen, where 2 Grand Slams and 12 Tallboys penetrated the 6-meter-thick reinforced concrete roof, knocking the U-boat factory out of commission. The V3 cannon bunker at Mimiek, however, proved a harder a nut to crack, with multiple conventional bombing raids mounted between November 1943 and June 1944, inflicting only minor damage. On July 6, 1944, the RAF launched a tall boy raid on the site, during which 2 bombs penetrated and collapsed large sections of the underground tunnel, burying over 300 Germans and forced laborers alike. This, combined with the discovery of a serious design flaw in the V3 shells, led to the Germans abandoning the site. However, Allied intelligence was not aware of this, and the search continued for a weapon capable of destroying the bunker. This culminated in Operation Aphrodite, a U.S. Army Air Force project which involved converting B-17 and B-24 Liberator bombers into radio-controlled drones, packing them with explosives and crashing them into the target. The drone was flown most of the way by an onboard pilot and navigator who bailed out when close to the target, allowing a radio operator in a nearby mothership to guide it the rest of the way. 2 Aphrodite missions were flown against Mimiak, the first on August 4, 1944. Pilot Lieutenant Fane Poole and Navigator Sergeant Philip Enterline successfully bailed out, but the radio control operator lost control of the drone and it spiraled into the ground short of the target. A second attempt was made on August 12th, but shortly into the mission, an electrical fault caused the drone's explosives to detonate prematurely over Blythe Estuary in England, killing Lieutenant Wilford Willey and Joseph B. Kennedy Jr., elder brother of future American President John F. Kennedy. In total, 14 Aphrodite raids were attempted against various targets, but most were failures, leading the USAAF to abandon the project. Attacks against Mimiak ended when Allied ground forces finally overran the site in September 1944. While the Tall Boy and Grand Slam bombs proved incredibly effective in combat, they suffered from a number of limitations. Their penetration ability, being directly tied to impact velocity, was limited by gravitational acceleration and the maximum altitude from which they could be accurately dropped. They were also extremely heavy, severely limiting the aircraft types that could carry them and the maximum speed and range of said aircraft. Strangely, an intriguing solution to these problems would come not from the mind of an engineer, but from the House of Mouse. By late 1941, Walt Disney Animation Studios was well on its way to becoming an entertainment juggernaut. The 4 animated feature films the studio had produced up to this point, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Dumbo, proved wildly popular with audiences and revolutionized the film industry. But this seemingly unstoppable momentum came to a screeching halt on December 7, 1941, when the Empire of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States entered the Second World War. An avowed patriot, Walt Disney halted all current film productions and effectively handed his studio over to the US government. Walt Disney Studios would produce hundreds of short films in support of the war effort, including training films such as Stop That Tank and propaganda shorts such as Education for Death and A Führer's Face, the latter of which depicted Donald Duck as a beleaguered citizen of the Third Reich. Between 1941 and 1945, the studio released only 4 feature-length animated films: Bambi, which was already well into production before the war started, Saludos Amigos, and The Three Caballeros, anthology films aimed at keeping Latin American nations on the side of the Allies, and perhaps the strangest entry in Disney's animated canon, Victory Through Air Power. Released on July 17, 1943, Victory Through Air Power was based on the book of the same name by Russian-American aviator and aircraft designer Alexander de Seversky. The 1-hour film featured a comedic animated retelling of the history of military aviation, intercut with live-action segments of Seversky explaining his theories on strategic air power. While many of Seversky's ideas would later be disproven, especially the notion that a well-armed bomber without fighter escort would always get through to its target, the film was nonetheless instrumental in convincing the US government to adopt a policy of long-range strategic daylight bombing against Germany and Japan. Equally influential was a sequence in which aircraft are shown dropping bombs fitted with rocket motors, allowing them to accelerate faster than gravity and penetrate U-boat pens and other fortified targets. At the time, no such weapon actually existed, the concept being entirely the product of a Disney animator's imagination. But for one Captain Edward Tyrrell of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, such a weapon was just what the Allied air forces needed to defeat German heavy fortifications. In September 1943, Tyrrell began developing a weapon inspired by the fictional rocket bunker buster, which soon became known as the Disney Bomb or Disney Swish. The weapon, officially designated the 4,500-pound concrete-piercing rocket-assisted bomb, consisted of a 28-centimeter diameter, a 5-meter-long hardened steel casing packed with 230 kilograms of high explosives, fitted with 19 3-inch cordite rocket motors. The motors would ignite around 30 seconds after release, burning for 3 seconds and accelerating the bomb bomb to 1,590 kilometers an hour, around 1.3 times the speed of sound. This allowed the Disney bomb to penetrate up to 5 meters of reinforced concrete, roughly the same as the Tall Boy and Grand Slam, but for less than half the weight, allowing multiple Disney bombs to be carried by a single aircraft. Though designed by the British, the Disney bomb was only ever operated by the USAAF, with B-17 bombers of the 92nd Bombardment Group being specially modified to carry it. 2 bombs were carried per aircraft on racks slung onto the wings. They were simply too long to fit in the bomb bay. Initial testing was conducted near Southampton and on the captured V2 bunker at Epelec in France. Of the 4 bombs dropped on the bunker, 2 hit their target, and the resultant damage was judged to be sufficient for the weapon to be approved for combat use. However, the Disney bomb saw only limited service before the war ended, with 158 being dropped on 4 combat missions against the torpedo boat pens at Imweden in the Netherlands, the Valentin U-boat pens near Bremen, and fortified targets around Hamburg. Further evaluation took place immediately after the war as part of Project Ruby, with Disney bombs, as well as Tall Boys Grand Slams and Amazon bombs, American copies of the Grand Slam, being dropped on various targets, such as Heligar Islands, the Epelec bunker, and the Valentin subpens. Results of these tests were unfortunately mixed. While the Disney's penetration ability was roughly on par with the Tall Boy and Grand Slam, it carried a much smaller explosive charge, limiting the damage that it could do after penetrating. This small charge also meant that, unlike the larger earthquake bombs, the Disney bomb needed to hit its target directly to be effective. This was something of a problem given the bomb's poor accuracy, the result of unreliable rocket motor ignition and limitations of 1940s bomb sight technology. For those reasons, the Disney bomb was judged to be of marginal usefulness and quickly removed from the Allied arsenal. The general concept was not abandoned, however, and several modern airdropped munitions, such as the French Matre Durandal anti-runway bomb, use rocket assistance to increase terminal velocity and penetration. Although an obscure and ultimately unsuccessful weapon, the Disney bomb remains a curious and unique example of the inspirational power of film and of life imitating art.